welcome to our very last video notes of Chapter 6, the Ancient Israelites. Today we're going to be looking at how the Jews and the people around them in the Mediterranean world interacted. Sometimes it was positive, sometimes it was negative. And it matters today because the Jews experienced many significant, important changes under Greek and Roman rule. Now, this is the first time that we're going to be introduced to some of these Greek and Roman figures that some of you I know have been waiting all year to study. So this is a really exciting time, and it's a great transition into kind of wrapping up the Israelites and moving on to the ancient Greeks next. So hang on tight, guys, and we'll dive right in. Bye.
Bye. Alright guys, so we've talked about a bunch of different groups of people who have taken over land from the Hebrews. We've talked about the Assyrians and we've talked about the Chaldeans, specifically King Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, he forced those people to live in Babylon away from their home. Now, particularly the Persians came in and they said, we don't think so. So they took over from King Nebuchadnezzar and they said to the Jewish people that they could go home, they could go to Judah if they wanted to. Remember, a lot of people chose to stay. Well, the Persians ruled over the Hebrews, or the Jewish people, for about 200 years. But then, in 331 BC, we see a guy named Alexander the Great. He was from Macedonia, and he conquered much of Mesopotamia and this Mediterranean region here. Alexander admired the Greek culture so much that he wanted to spread it to other civilizations. Now, he did allow the Jews to still live in Judah, which is this area here, this purple, and he allowed them to stay there, but many Jews still lived in Babylon or other areas of the Mediterranean region. This particular event or moving of people is called the diaspora or diaspora. Now, Miss Todrick will be going into more detail, so make sure you guys are ready to learn all about the arrival of the Greek rule.
So guys, this term diaspora is really important. It's a Greek word that means scattered. So when I say diaspora, this is always my hand motion. I say diaspora, and I spread my hands out. I go from everybody together, like the Jews were in Jerusalem, to scattered out. So diaspora. So I want you to put a star by that term, diaspora, here. I know, it's not a very good star. I'm sorry. Y'all know I'm a horrible artist. I'm sorry. But this is a really important term because we start to see how the Jews start getting spread out all over. We've got 1, 2, 3 continents that the Jews are going to spread out over. Some settled in other parts of Alexander the Great's empire, and we're going to talk more about Alexander the Great in a bit. And so those are the ones you see in Europe, in Jerusalem, and through there. But other Jews moved back over to Babylon. Remember, the Jews had already been to Babylon once with Nebuchadnezzar. Some moved to Egypt, and some moved all along the North Mediterranean coast, along Africa, along Spain, what's now into Italy. So we get a Jewish population all over the Mediterranean Sea. And this is true even today. There are old Jewish populations all over this area. And we'll see in some centers we're going to be doing on Monday and Tuesday that even though the Jews spread out and they were scattered, they had this diaspora, a lot of their traditions were still very similar throughout. And so those traditions kind of helped them hold on to their identity even when they were scattered. One thing that the Jews had in common, no matter where they were, is a very tight hold on their beliefs, their idea of monotheism, believing in only one God. And we're going to start to see, once again, they're going to come into conflict with other people around them and kind of the ruling powers because of this. So we've got a little timeline here that we're going to walk through. Now, Ms. Lewis said we know that about 323 BC, Alexander the Great dies, and his generals divide the empire into 4 kingdoms. Now, we're going to talk more about Alexander the Great when we get to Greece, but we have to keep in mind that we have kind of this scattered area that is divided up into these kingdoms, and each one's a little bit different. And so one of the areas that was one of these kingdoms after Alexander the Great's empire collapsed was Judah. And remember, guys, Judah was one of those kingdoms after Solomon died that Israel split into 2. So this is where Jerusalem is, okay? This is the Jews' homeland. So this Greek king who is in control of this area of the Jews' homeland, of Jerusalem, the city of David and Solomon and Solomon's temple, he starts to require Jews to worship the Greek gods and goddesses. Now, we know from our history of the Hebrews that this is not going to go over easily. This is one of the deepest held beliefs of Judaism, is the belief in only one God. So this is about 176 BC. So this is about 150 years after Alexander dies. So the next few years are really rough. There's a lot of bad feeling towards the Greeks, and the Jews start to kind of wonder, well, what should we do? And so in 167 BC, a group of Jews known as the Maccabees, after their leader, Maccabeus, lead a revolt against the Greek king, or rebellion's another great word. Okay, and they know that they really don't have a whole lot of chance of winning. They're the underdogs here. The Greek king controls a lot, and they know that the Greek army is very powerful. But in 164 BC, so guys, look, this is a 3-year-long war at least, the Maccabees finally capture back the temple in Jerusalem, okay? And they clear out the statues of all the Greek gods that the Greeks had put up. The Greeks had put up temples in Jerusalem, or put up statues of their gods and goddesses in the Jewish temples. And they rededicate the temple to worshiping the Hebrew God, okay? Now, an important note is that the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah, which was this year, right before Christmas, about a week or so, it celebrates these events. It celebrates this victory of the Maccabees over the Greek forces. And on Monday, when we go back into our centers, this is another one of the things that we're going to learn about. And this is a holiday that is celebrated by Jews, one of many holidays celebrated by Jews all over the world today. Now we're on to Roman rule of Judea. Romans had gained control of most of the eastern Mediterranean lands. The city of Rome in present-day Italy was named after the Romans and became their capital. However, the Romans wanted more. They wanted a bigger empire. In 63 BC, the Romans conquered Judea, and renamed it Judea. They were led the Romans needed a ruler for Judea. They chose a follower of the Jewish religion. His name was Herod. Herod built many forts and cities in Judea, including the Second Temple in Jerusalem. After Herod's death, they were led by powerful generals and controlled most of the Mediterranean lands. Jews started to have many different views about how to practice their religion and handle the Romans. All right, guys, so we want to talk about what the Jews looked like under Roman rule and what that was like for them. They were actually divided into 4 groups and 4 power groups. So we're talking the people that have power on our social pyramid. These would be the guys closer to the top. So the first group we want to talk about is the Pharisees. The Pharisees taught in synagogues, and they stressed following the 10 Commandments and doing what you needed to do to be a Jewish man or a Jewish woman who followed the law. That was very important. You needed to do exactly what the law said and follow that so that you could be worthy and you could be presented to God and you'd be able to be holy. They thought, the view on the Romans thought, so what did the Pharisees think about the Romans? They thought that the Romans should be resisted peacefully. So if you look at your chart, it goes across this way in the groups and then how they felt about the Romans. The Pharisees thought that you could deal with the Romans, even though they were invading your space in Jerusalem and they were coming in, that you should peacefully resist them. We shouldn't do what they say, but we shouldn't have a fight about that either. The Sadducees were a group of wealthy noble families, and they favored cooperation with the Romans. And the reason they would favor cooperation with the Romans is because if they were the Sadducees, they were wealthy, and so if you could have the Romans, you definitely could be trading and you could be making money in there. And so they did not mind Roman influence, and they didn't mind Romans being there. They just wanted to make more money. Then the Essenes are another group of Jewish people who broke away from the temple in Jerusalem. They lived separately in the desert, and they prayed for God to remove Roman rule. They didn't like the Romans either, but they didn't want to be in a Roman city, so they moved away, and they thought that they were going to pray and be able to have God remove the Romans as he had removed other enemies in their past. Now, the Zealots are the fourth group of the Jewish people that we want to talk about, and we're only talking about the ones that had the power at the top of our social pyramid. The Zealots were politically active. So that means they were involved in politics, and they were actively trying to get the Romans to do what they wanted to, and they wanted to fight for their freedom. They were willing to fight for it. So you can see with the power broken into four different places and having the people at the top not always agree on what should be done with the Romans, they were not able to put forth a united front. And united we stand, remember, and divided we fall. So dividing into different groups like that and splitting up their power made it easier for the Romans to conquer them and for them not to remain a nation or a people group that stayed together and kept their identity. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so when Miss Todrick left off in the history that she was teaching and the slide that she had, the Jewish people had experienced a diaspora, and they had spread all around the area. And remember, I told you the Zealots were politically motivated, and so these Zealots, one more thing before I get there. Miss Todrick stopped at 164 BC, and if you'll notice, we are at AD 66. So that means we have jumped over year 1, and now we're on the AD side of the timeline. This is the first time that we've talked about any things that were AD. So the Zealots revolted and overpowered the small Roman army that was in Jerusalem. So they were able, Jerusalem was very far away from Rome, and there were not a lot of Romans there to defend the city, and so they were able to overtake them. But then the Romans retaliated, and they killed thousands of Jews there, and they destroyed the temple, as well as they forced the Jews to leave Jerusalem. So it was another diaspora, so to speak, where they were forced to leave, and their temple was destroyed. Now, the temple, this area where the temple was, is very important to lots of religious people in that area. So about 132 AD, the Jews rebel again, and they work to gain their freedom. So, and this one doesn't go as well. The Romans put down this rebellion, and they impose strict control. And they forbid some of the Jews from living in or visiting Jerusalem. And that was very upsetting to them because they felt like that was their homeland. But the Romans didn't want them to go back to their homeland. It was part of their punishment for rebelling in the first place. And to make it complete, the Romans renamed Judea, and they called it Palestine. And that's the area that there's a lot of turmoil in right now in our world today. So we can see that the Jewish history plays a big role, even moving into today and what happens in our world. All right, guys, talk to you later.
Okay, guys, now let's tackle this hot question. Which Jewish group's ideas about how to deal with the Romans do you agree with the most, and why? So the first thing you need to do is look at the four groups listed above the hot question. The Pharisees, I'm going to go with Sadducees, the Essenes, and the Zealots. Then look at their views on the Romans. Choose one group and why you agree with that group. Start off your writing with the Jewish group I agree with the most is, then list it, period. Put I agree with the, whichever group you chose, group because, and that's where you're going to explain it. This should be a minimum of 3 sentences, 1 to list the group, and 2 to explain your reasons. We know you guys can do this. You've been doing this all year long, so make it good, make it count. Losing 20 points is not worth it. Good luck.